Hello everyone and welcome to Daily Dose of Wow. I hope everyone had an amazing Christmas, but we got some really interesting stuff to share, so let's get right into it. 2023 is seeming to be a very controversial year for abortion laws in the United States of America. Conservative lawmakers will try to narrow the last few avenues to abortion available in the red states. But before we talk about the future, let's take a quick look in the recent past and how these abortion laws were construed during this time. According to a study done in 2014 by the Guttmacher Institute, 75% of the people who have had abortions lived below the poverty line. On June 24, 2022, a U.S. Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade, dating back nearly 50 years, was overturned. It means that the states will now get to decide how abortion is regulated instead of federal government legislating that decision. Some states have already passed laws to restrict or ban the medical procedure, but the fight over abortion is far from over. 2023 will be the year that kicks off what promises to be years-long state-by-state brawl among the Americans who believe abortion is essential to freedom and Americans who believe the procedure should be disqualified from the Constitution in its entirety. In total, there are 22 states that have a near total or 6 weeks abortion ban. States like Florida, which outlaws abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, or Georgia, which bans it past roughly 6 weeks of pregnancy, may tighten up those bans to start earlier on in pregnancy. Americans United for Life is an organization famed for its wildly successful anti-abortion stance. It is working on a model legislation that could cut down on access to abortion-inducing pills, one of the anti-abortion's greatest goals. Specifically, these bills will require abortion patients to meet in person with a provider if they want a medication abortion, which are induced using pills. But the biggest legal challenge to abortion could come in shape of a lawsuit filed in Texas last month. In November, 4 doctors and anti-abortion groups sued the FDA, claiming that the FDA had overstepped its authority when it approved the drug mifepristone for use in abortions in 2000. In 2020, medication abortions which use mifepristone account for more than half of all U.S. abortions. If the lawsuit succeeds, it could imperil the entire nation's access to medication abortion, regardless of whether a state has protected abortion rights. Micheal James Pratt, the man responsible for organizing the elaborate sex trafficking scheme and website Girls Do Porn, which forced and coerced potentially hundreds of women into having sex on camera, was arrested in Spain on Friday. Pratt made it to the top 10 on CIA's most wanted list with a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. According to a news outlet, Pratt was hiding in Madrid and checked into a hotel in the center of the city on Wednesday using one of his many false identities. The owners and operators of Girls Do Porn were also charged with federal counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion in 2019. Pratt and his associates filmed hundreds of sex scenes with young women between 2012 and 2019, luring them to their San Diego-based shooting locations under the guise of modeling gigs and fast cash. Many of these women testified that they weren't even told until they arrived on location that it was a porn shoot. Pratt and his co-conspirators also promised many of these women that their videos would only be seen by private collectors in faraway countries and their communities at home would never see their sex scenes. This was a lie. Girls Do Porn uploaded the videos almost immediately to the internet, to massive tube sites including Pornhub. The FBI declared Pratt a wanted fugitive in early 2020. He'd actually fled the US in 2019 during a civil trial where he and his associates were accused by 22 women of fraud and coercion. In that trial, a state judge ruled that Pratt and his co-conspirators owed these women $12.7 million in damages. Many of his associates have pled guilty to federal charges and faced convictions since then, including the main performer Ruben Andre Garcia, who was sentenced to 20 years in jail by a federal court in California, the cameraman Theodore Teddy Gee, and Pratt's closest co-conspirator Matthew Isaac Wolf, who also pled guilty to federal trafficking charges in 2022. In another top news, India has scaled up security along a disputed border with China to push back against what India called an encroachment of its territory following a brawl between the two countries' troops earlier this month. Chinese troops entered the mountainous Tawang city in Arunachal Pradesh, which sits on the eastern tip of India and which China also considers part of Tibet and thus its own territory, where they encountered an Indian patrol team and traded blows. Troops from both sides sustained minor injuries according to the Indian Army. This was the first major flare-up in a year since a deadly confrontation in 2020 that killed at least 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers. Last week has been pretty tense for India and China, the two largest standing armies in the world, because for the first time in 45 years, shots were exchanged in a provocative manner, or warning shots, at the de facto border known as the Line of Actual Control, or LAC. China and India do have a bit of a history. After China invaded Tibet in 1950, an attempt with India to formalize their borders, turned into a dispute. In 1962, the two countries actually entered into a war. China won conclusively. The LAC was effectively marked and patrolled by both armies. The rules of engagement signed by the two countries made sure that the armies do not open fire, among other acts of conflict, to maintain peace. You guys might be wondering, how did they end up with so many casualties in 2020 face-off if neither of the armies are allowed to use weapons? Well, the casualties were a result of hand-to-hand combat, use of barbed wire bats, batons, and stone pelting. Many soldiers fell to their death as the terrain is mountainous. The LAC is a conceptual, rather a recognized demarcation between Indian and Chinese territory. An official border has never been marked on maps since both disagree on its details. India considers the LAC to be 3,500 kilometers long, while China considers it to be around 2,000 kilometers long. This year's events, and especially the Galwan Valley face-off in 2020, led to a ban on Chinese origin apps by the government of India, such as TikTok, and an official boycott of Chinese products. This despite the fact that the both countries are very economically interdependent. China is taking variation of proactive steps to win an upper hand on India along LAC by strategically building and populating villages with Chinese citizens to claim the territory and to control the autonomy of the region. At least 3 villages have sprung up by China this year in a strategically sensitive region along the de facto border between India and China. The villages are built approximately 5 kilometers from Bumla Pass in northeastern Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which is not recognized by China as part of India. Brahma Chelani, a professor of strategic studies at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi, said that the China strategy for territorial dominance in the Himalayas is akin to its expansionism in South China Sea. He also mentioned by quietly constructing new villages in the borders of India, Nepal, and Bhutan, China is seeking to assert its territorial claims. The India-China relations also impact their relationship with other neighboring countries like Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, and Japan, who are watching closely. They see what Beijing is doing with India and they are concerned they could be next. Why is this news relatively important? Well, China and India are not only the two of the economic giants in the world, they're also the two largest standing nuclear armies in the world. On paper, it may sound just scary, but reality is that a potential war could escalate and may become a possibility of a nuclear confrontation. That's it for today, guys. Hopefully you liked what you heard. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and we'll be back with more very soon.